Welcome, intrepid listeners and watchers, to episode 16 of Christians versus Pharisees, choosing sides and how to fight for them in the Mormon Civil War. It is my joy and privilege to have joined the team organising the annual Sunstone Symposium here in the British Isles. This year we met in the English Midlands city of Leicester, in the heartland of early Mormon history here, and also the 19th century Chartist movement campaigning to give working class men the vote. Our overall theme was harking back to the church's idealistic and utopian origins here, with the theme of resistance, protest, and utopia in the British Isles. We were honoured to have two of the newly appointed Community of Christ apostles, Lachlan Mackay and Canadian Shannon McAdam, join us as they were in the country. And this was a particularly special symposium for me, as my dear friend and fellow Welling Ward member, Ore Caffo, was one of our keynote speakers. And my emeritus Maidstone Stake president, who has also joined the Sunstone planning team, David Eaton, gave a fascinating and important presentation about what he sees as the essential reforms and apologies the church must make if it is to keep its members and survive. David was asked by a senior General Authority 70 what his recommendations for changes are, and he doesn't hold back. So look out for that one. All the presentations were filmed and are starting to appear in the Sunstone Foundation YouTube channel, where you can enjoy them for free. My presentation was about my experience navigating the journey from being raised in and passionately enthusiastic for an idealistic version of LDS Mormonism, until it all started to crumble and change with the truth bombs and the headlong plunge into boring and sinister thought control and corruption in the last 30 years that has caused the vast majority of LDS children and converts to leave. And why, despite all that, I still see potential for what the best of Mormonism has to offer the religious and political world of the 21st century. And how those ideals and that community of intellectual and spiritual idealists is actually now thriving in the LDS Church in Exile, in inverse proportion to its suppression in the chapels on a Sunday. I was asked a lot of excellent challenging questions at the end, and for this online version I've edited in a more thorough explanation of the surprising parade of intellectual Mormon superstars who converted and mentored my convert Great Grandmother Jeannie Bleakley and her descendants, starting exactly a century ago with her conversion in Manchester by Apostle James Talmage in 1926. There has always been a faction of Mormon leaders and members who understood and tried to live by the very best ideals our religion has to offer. The Mormon Civil War between them and the anti-intellectual control freaks who have come to dominate the LDS Church has been going on for a very long time. But while it seems the mainstream institutional LDS Church is basically doomed now, and baby steps of reform are always too little and too late, the thriving, online, nuanced and post-Mormon communities and rare and precious gatherings like Sunstone prove that what I call the Christian Mormon flame of limitless ambition for progress and learning is still burning brightly and lighting up a world of inquiring minds with its rays. All right, all good? Everyone happy bunnies? Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. So my theme is really what's going on today. How is it that we can resist, protest, fight for a British Mormon utopia in the same way as the pioneers, the first missionaries, the way Community of Christ has tried to kind of fix things and make it all work in the modern age, and my sort of personal journey through that. So to begin with, a bit of background. I'm speaking here in my area of expertise, which is LDS Mormonism.
which can be a very different experience to other branches in the Mormon family. But I hope I can offer some encouragement or ideas for whatever pathway of reform or politics or religion you are on. I live in a very strange, sort of complicated but also simple twilight zone in my relationship with Mormonism now. It's mostly uncharted territory and not many people are willing to do it, so for completely sensible reasons. Trying to be a bridge builder while also shouting criticism at the church. It's looking for good and hope while also looking for the bad and the many reasons to despair. And David Eaton's just done an amazing, very gently worded evisceration of the things the church is getting wrong and his suggestions for improving it. So I'm in this sort of weird state of flux, and I'll do my best to put it into words and tell my story. But also with hope, I'm still hanging in wanting the church to reform, but also despair that it probably won't. And it's highly likely that in my lifetime, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will no longer be sustainable. And I would even argue the same for Community of Christ. We're all in this trouble together for very different reasons, and some of them similar reasons. So my life story, I was born to parents at BYU, both Brits. My dad was a third generation member of the church. His grandmother had joined the church. She had a sort of British Empire life. She was living in Sri Lanka, which was Ceylon then, and her husband was teaching at the government training college there, a maths teacher, very autistic. And she was managing the music exams throughout the early 20th century for southern India and Ceylon. And she sent her children to boarding school in England and came visited them. And she had a friend or a cousin who had missionaries living with her in Manchester. They took her along to hear James Talmage speak. He was acting mission president at the time of the British mission, was converted, went back to Ceylon and spent most of her working life as the only Mormon in Ceylon, and corresponding by letter with some of the more intellectual general authorities. John Whitsoe and his wife particularly were very supportive. I've just committed the ultimate woke Mormon crime. I can't remember her name. Dobby, bad Dobby. It will come back to me. But my excuse is I'm a teacher. I have no memory of names anymore. They got used up years ago. I've had to remember thousands.
Please bear with me as I add a bonus section to this presentation that I did not have time for on the day to better explain the deep roots of the Mormonism I grew up in and why I am so passionate for it to be its best self and survive in the United Kingdom if it is willing to reform. Apostle James Talmage served as president of the British Mission from 2024 to 26 when my great grandmother Jeannie Bleakley was converted by hearing him preach in Manchester. He was succeeded by Apostle John A. Whitsoe, a Harvard graduate scientist who served as British Mission President in 1927 and then Europe Mission President after that. John and his wife, who's called Leah, a granddaughter of Brigham Young, who was also an academic who studied economics and education at university, very kindly took a personal interest in supporting new convert Jeannie Bleakley as a solitary Mormon living in Ceylon and occasionally visiting her children at school in England. Leah, in particular, corresponded regularly with Jeannie. While John was serving as a mission president in Europe, Leah served as the president of all the women's auxiliaries in Europe and must have recognized and resonated with Jeannie's professional and leadership role as a pioneer for the church and a music education administrator. A decade after her conversion during World War II, Jeannie was constantly worried about her children, who were all in harm's way. We are very lucky to have hundreds of their letters as she corresponded with them all from Ceylon. Her daughter Joyce was living with the acting British mission president Andre Anastasiou and his English wife Mary Mead during the Blitz in London and trying to pass music exams. President Anastasiou was a Russian who had converted to the church while studying law in London and drafted the first translation of the Book of Mormon into Russian with James Talmage's encouragement. He and Mary had their hands full with their own children, but opened their home and hearts to be surrogate parents of Joyce, who was having a ball in the exhilarating social life and drama of wartime London. Joyce had trained in classical Indian dance growing up in Ceylon and appeared on the front cover of Illustrated magazine in 1943, performing with a troupe of Indian dancers who toured the country after a season in the West End. My great auntie Joyce met and married a Mormon American Army lawyer serving in England called Wendell Anderson, and they raised a family in Logan, Utah after the war. Jeannie and James's oldest son, John, my granddad, served as a doctor in the Royal Army Medical Corps and spent the war fighting in Europe. He was posted for a while to Northern Ireland, where he married my granny, Nancy, and started working on a family of 6 children. Although Nancy did not join the church until her old age, she was very supportive of her children being raised Mormon and even took on some callings in Relief Society. The reading list John gave her to prepare her for marriage to him was Joseph Smith, an American Prophet, and a book all about human reproduction. Being the practical doctor he was, he taught Granny to track her menstrual cycle with a thermometer and coordinated his rare leaves home with it to maximize the chances of reproduction. Consequently, they produced twins, and then my dad was born in Ulster, while Grandad was crossing the English Channel on a ship as part of the D-Day invasion of France in the summer of 1944. After the war, Grandad John became a GP in Bangor, Northern Ireland, and he was the president of one of the first elders' quorums in Britain. His second councillor was across the Irish Sea in Liverpool. In his lifetime, the church grew exponentially from these small beginnings. But tragedy struck for Jeannie's other 2 sons during the war. Bobby had studied Chinese languages at Cambridge University and was working at the British consulate in Singapore with a particular focus on trying to rescue girls from sex trafficking by criminal gangs when the Japanese invaded and he disappeared during the invasion. He had been mobilized at the last minute to fight on the beaches, and throughout the war, Jeannie and the family did not know if he was a prisoner of war in one of the hellish Japanese camps or had died fighting. We are pretty sure now that he was killed on the beach where he was last seen. My brother Tim recently visited the memorial plaque he is listed on in St. Andrew's Cathedral in Singapore. Jeannie's youngest child, Derek, joined the Royal Air Force as soon as he could leave boarding school, and he was soon killed in an accident while training other pilots in South Africa. Jeannie was a very emotional and loving mother, and in her hour of need, Leah Widsow's letters were a great comfort to her. Only 3 of Leah and John Widsow's 6 children had survived into adulthood, so she truly understood Jeannie's grief. Another British mission president and intellectual role model who was a strong influence on the rational and intellectual approach to Mormonism that shaped my family's culture was lawyer and educator Apostle Hugh B. Brown. He served as president of the British Mission from 1937 to 1940 and from 1944 to 1946 before becoming an apostle and first presidency member, famous for championing science and reason at BYU against anti-evolutionists and trying to end the racist segregation in the church. My granddad John became a Mormon youth leader in the Young Men Mutual Improvement Association while studying medicine before the war in London in the 1930s, and collaborated in that effort with an American missionary called Gordon B. Hinckley to establish the prototype young adult program for 18 to 25-year-olds called the M-Men. He was a champion of healthy living and loved the church's word of wisdom, and Elder Hinckley wrote a profile about him in the Millennial Star, the British Mission newspaper. After mentioning John's high achievements as sports captain and head boy of Lancaster Grammar School before training as a doctor,
Gordon wrote the following, which perfectly encapsulates the intellectual Mormonism my granddad, with his enormous book collection, epitomized. Quote, "There is nothing blustery about his style, nothing officious about his manner. He is a quiet, mild-mannered young fellow with the predominant physical characteristic, a smile, heartening and infectious. Abundant living on the part of its adherents convinced him of the virtue of Mormonism. The Book of Mormon proved to his rational mind the divinity of the work. Study and prayer brought an unshakable testimony. He was baptized in April of 1932. As a student in medicine, he has convinced himself of the irrefutable divinity of the word of wisdom. As a scholar, he has applied the test of reason and logic to the gospel plan. As a young man, he has thrilled to the opportunities offered by the church. His life is a challenge to every youth in the land to grow strong and walk nobly. Men activity is the field of promise." Close quote.
There is a delightful postscript to my great grandmother Jeannie Bleakley's friendship with the Widsows. In 1959, Jeannie made a rare trip to the USA to visit her daughter, my great auntie Joyce. We have a delightful, vibrantly coloured photo of Joyce with John and Leah Widsow, and a newspaper clipping reporting on how Leah took Jeannie to October General Conference and introduced her to President David O. McKay. The accompanying photo perfectly captures what must have been a profound moment for Jeannie as she gazes intensely into the eyes of the prophet of the religion she has been fervently faithful to almost entirely on her own in Ceylon. But following the sexist patriarchal conventions of the time, the journalists do not even name these remarkable women. They are, of course, just appendages to their husbands. The caption reads, quote, "President David O. McKay and Mrs. John Widsow greet Mrs. James Bleakley, who made trip from Ceylon, just off the tip of India, to attend LDS conference." Close quote.
Growing up, I knew almost nothing of any of that history, which it has blown my mind to research and discover in recent years. But all those influences had a powerful impact on the kind of Mormonism that was normal for my Bleakley clan. A religion firmly rooted in evidence, science, rational analysis, and higher education. Forward-looking rather than backward and superstitious. Unafraid to have intense debates and contend for the faith. A pathway to godhood that was primarily about learning and learning and learning, as well as selfless public service. Not self-loathing about sin and leader worship. Humbly but confidently stepping up to be a leader when needed. Critical analysis of what could and should be better, and initiating new ideas and programs to help that happen. Putting your shoulder to the wheel to make the vision of a Mormon Zion that would grow to fill the world happen, rather than expecting other people to make it happen and do the thinking for you and just following them. We did our best to stand on the shoulders of the intellectual Mormon heroes who had nurtured and guided our family's Mormonism from the start. James the scientist and Mary the teacher Talmage. John the scientist and Leah the teacher and author Widsow. Hugh the lawyer and teacher and Zena Brown. Hugh's wife, Zena, was the daughter of a remarkable businesswoman and activist for women's education and votes. Even Elder Landell Stoddard Merrill, the Manchester district leader who baptized Jeannie and befriended her sons John and Bobby, was from intellectual Mormon royalty. You couldn't make it up. Elder Landell's grandfather was polygamous apostle Mariner Wood Merrill. Mariner Merrill had 8 wives and 46 children.
With his wife Almira J. Bembridge, he had his son Charles Edward Merrill. Charles married 3 wives, and with his 3rd wife, Anna Victoria Stoddard, he had Jeannie's missionary, Landor Stoddard Merrill. Mariner Wood Merrill also had a son with his wife Maria Kingsbury, who was Joseph F. Merrill. Joseph F. Merrill later became an apostle too, but before that he became famous for being the first Utah-born person to get a PhD at a university outside of Utah. Professionally, he became head of a school of mining and engineering, training people to work in the booming Utah mining industries. But more importantly, he founded the seminary program of study for Mormon teenagers and negotiated with the state school system for them to have time out of the usual curriculum to have those seminary lessons in. He was inspired by his wife Annie Hyde telling him about the memorable and engaging stories James Talmage had taught a class she was in about the Book of Mormon. In 1926, the year Landor baptized Jeannie, his polygamous half-uncle Joseph Merrill wrote a manifesto for the purpose of a new program called Institute to continue the scriptural education of LDS young adults after seminary. As happens today, he was very conscious of the struggle young Mormons were having, being taught a very basic and not very intellectually robust version of their religion at church, and then experiencing a testimony-threatening shock when they went on to higher education and learnt things that challenged their beliefs and which the church had not prepared them to deal with. Joseph was ambitious for young Mormons to be able to flourish in higher education and careers of any kind in the secular world, not just being gospel doctrine teachers, while having an informed and confident understanding of their religion that could handle the challenges they would encounter. Quote, in this collegiate seminary work, i.e., at college level rather than high school, we are, of course, starting on a new thing in the church, but if we keep the objective clearly in mind, it may be helpful. And may I say that this objective, as I see it, is to enable our young people attending the colleges to make the necessary adjustments between the things they have been taught in the church and the things they are learning in the university, to enable them to become firmly settled in their faith as members of the church. The big question then is what means and methods can be employed to help them to make these reconciliations and adjustments. The primary purpose, therefore, is not to teach them theology. It is not to prepare them for seminary teachers or preachers of the gospel. We should therefore continually hold before our minds that we want to hold them in the church, make them active, intelligent, sincere Latter-day Saints. We want to keep them from growing cold in the faith and indifferent to their obligations as church members. We want to help them to see that it is perfectly reasonable and logical to be really sincere Latter-day Saints. Close quote. That's the religion I can believe in. The religion with scriptures and prophets that say things like, the glory of God is intelligence. It is impossible for a man to be saved in ignorance. Whatever principle of intelligence we gain in this life, it will rise with us in the resurrection. And if a person gains more knowledge and intelligence in this life through his diligence and obedience than another, he will have so much the advantage in the world to come. Seek ye diligently, and teach one another words of wisdom. Yea, seek ye out of the best books words of wisdom. Seek learning, even by study, and also by faith. Man was created to dress the earth, and to cultivate his mind, and to glorify God. To be learned is good if they hearken unto the counsels of God. And of course, Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, which says, quote, and I give unto you a commandment, that you shall teach one another the doctrine of the kingdom, Teach ye diligently, and my grace shall attend you, that you may be instructed more perfectly in theory, in principle, in doctrine, in the law of the gospel, in all things that pertain to the kingdom of God, that are expedient for you to understand. Of things both in heaven and in the earth and under the earth, things which have been, things which are, things which must shortly come to pass, things which are at home, things which are abroad, the wars and the perplexities of the nations, and the judgments which are on the land, and a knowledge also of countries and of kingdoms, that ye may be prepared in all things when I shall send you again to magnify the calling whereunto I have called you, and the mission with which I have commissioned you. Close quote. All of these men and women mentored each other's education, careers, and church service, and mentored my Mormon ancestors personally and in their published teachings. They rejoiced, as I did, in having a religion fit for the 20th and 21st centuries. A religion where true science is true religion, with no contradictions or conflict. A religion that embraces education and culture, academia and the creative arts as parts of being a whole person with the potential to become a god or goddess. A religion built on the best that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and their scriptures taught about learning and progressing and democracy and common consent, and making every person a prophet, priest, and king who can receive revelations and be anxiously engaged in good causes and creative approaches to ministry without having to wait to be commanded in all things. The religion encapsulated in section 121 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where your only leadership power and tool is sincere love and gentle persuasion with convincing arguments, never an appeal to authority and priesthood rank or manipulative guile and compulsion. Just as there has been a legacy through the generations of Jedi, Christian, Mormon leadership of understanding and championing rational faith, free thought, and empowering people with hope and grace, that was passed on through B.H. Roberts, James Talmage, John Widtsoe, Hugh B. Brown, David O. McKay, Gordon Hinckley at his best, Dieter Uchtdorf, and new European kids on the block, English Apostle Patrick Kieran and French 70 Christophe Giraud Carrier, who made me want to shout with pride to anyone, "I'm a Mormon!" There has been a catastrophically bad dark side to this religion that has now nearly completed its malevolent work to kill it dead. The Christian Mormon Jedi Masters and their Padawan learners have all along had to literally do intellectual battle with their nemeses, the Sith Lords and their hateful apprentices, the Pharisaical Mormon control freaks, whose religion is the one New Testament Jesus and Mormonism taught me is the religion of Lucifer. Command and control, thought stopping, obedience obsessed, keeping up appearances while being heartless hypocrites, who pile burdens of poverty and pointless hard labour on futile hamster wheels, doing and teaching the wrong things on a loop, on the weak and vulnerable and poor, instead of helping them. Racist, slavery-loving, sexist Brigham Young, running with all of Joseph Smith's very worst ideas. George Q. Cannon, whose mantras of authoritarian control over members' minds are still quoted in general conferences by the First Presidency. Joseph F. Smith, his son Joseph Fielding Smith, his son-in-law Bruce R. McConkie, Mark E. Peterson, Spencer W. Kimball, Ezra Taft Benson, Boyd K. Packer, Henry B. Eyring, Russell M. Nelson, Dallin H. Oakes. all inventors and authors of libraries of stifling Talmuds and general handbooks claiming to be the manuals of Mormon doctrine, full of petty unscriptural commandments to imprison and bury Latter-day Saints in constant guilt and anxious perfectionism. Racists, anti-evolutionists, sexists who want women at home cooking and cleaning and having babies and nowhere near the workplace or the universities or the church presidencies with the real power. Believers and inventors of fairy tales over facts. Excommunicators of historians who tell the truth. Prideful, self-important, pompous money hoarders. Protectors of child abusers, lying liars who lie. And caught between those two polar opposites are the tormented souls with much less of a mind of their own, like M. Russell Ballard and Jeffrey R. Holland, who have championed both versions of Mormonism and inevitably drowned in the stormy ocean of their own self-contradictions. So this is the Mormon Civil War I fight in, wondering whether or when to let go of the dream and quickly disappearing reality of an international community of remarkable, idealistic people, reaching out across the world to support each other, be parents to each other's children serving missions or separated by war, stretching rather than shrinking our minds, discovering and sharing our ideas and creativity and talents, reaching for excellence while loving and serving the less lucky and privileged as equals and friends, dreaming of a better world and building it in our own homes and communities. Was it ever really real? Or were the lucky few it was working for too naive about how many people it was not reaching? Should we still bother speaking and working for that kind of a religion when secular society keeps getting to the milestones of making a Zion society long before our denomination catches up, reluctant and exhausted from the struggle to change?
Anyway, so my dad grew up in Northern Ireland as a member of the church. My mum was a recent convert from lapsed Catholicism, and they both went to BYU. And they got married at the Salt Lake Temple, had me, and came back when I was about 1.5. So not much cultural damage was done, except they obviously carried on with the religion. While I was there, I was born with a cleft lip. And one of the many things I have to be grateful for to the church is Primary Hospital in Utah had some of the best plastic surgery of the time in the early 1970s, and they sorted it out. There's poor me healing, and I had to tie my arms down so I wouldn't suck my thumb. I'm a direct beneficiary of the church's investment in charity, in establishing an amazing hospital, in funding good work. This is my extended family. 90% of those people are active Latter-day Saints in the Bleakley clan. That was our family reunion last year. Amazing, wonderful people. Some of them are LGBTQ, and the family's been, on the whole, really tolerant and supportive and lovely to all. Here's my early years, primary, in someone's living room in the dark 1970s. That's me in the red. There's some photos my mum took. She was state primary president, I think. So we've got these amazing slides of there's me in sunbeams learning about Jesus. That was my sunbeam book up in someone's bed. And our primary colours flags. We're singing the primary song. And continue to have an amazing life in the church. The road shows. There I am as Gabriel or something, or St. Peter. And my second wife, Lynn, both married in the temple. We'll come to that later. So I served a mission in the Florida Tallahassee mission and was in the armpit of the Bible Belt. Amazing experience. But all of this was incredibly validating. My calculation for going on mission is the last thing on earth I wanted to do was people come back glad they went. So I just assumed something magical would happen over the 2 years because the idea of harassing other people with religion was extremely un-British and I was not comfortable with it. But I had a really great time. It was a lot of fun. I did some major art projects in local schools, painting murals. And certainly the completely dysfunctional levels of corruption in Bible Belt evangelical Christian televangelist, Christianity there definitely made us look good by comparison. And they were even more racist than we were. So I'm coming back from my mission, stoked up. It's great. We are the future. The church is booming, exponentially growing. All seem to be really good. And my parents modeled for me the idea that you can be absolutely faithful in the church, but also quite critical. Like we'd have Sunday lunch between the sessions of church on a Sunday. Mum would go into a major rant about all the oppression of the women and everything that had gone wrong. And my dad would kind of attempt passive aggressively to calm her down. But I got used to hearing quite robust dialogue about the problems in church. But the punchline was never, therefore we're leaving. It was always, what are we doing to fix it? We're in charge here. It's our job. It's our responsibility. And that, I think, has given me quite an extraordinary resilience to kind of roll with the punches along the way, because I was never set up from the start with an expectation that all is well in Zion. And that I have realised since was quite rare as a worldview, but also has been a real blessing and help for me. I was a bit cynical when we sang I Hope They Call Me on a Mission as in primary. I was like, I definitely hope they don't call me on a mission. But it basically made sense. I could see that my health, my well-being, my social life was much more rich and fulfilling and purposeful than my friends at school, whose apparently limited lives basically revolved around risky sexual activities and inebriation. And that's kind of all they had going for them. So again, no competition. I'm having the best life. Thank you. And then I went to university and met my friend Steve Aitchison, who was the assistant to the chaplain and ran a Bible study group on Monday evenings. So I was like, yes, please, I'll go along to that. And I joined the Christian Union, and I had been in the Christian Union at secondary school as well. And there came a point where the leadership of the Christian Union were quite radical Pentecostals, and they had an anti-cult campaigner come round and do lectures at all the local churches. And they told me they didn't want me praying with the Christian Union anymore. I could attend, but I couldn't pray. Steve was very disturbed by this because he's like, Christian Union is not a church. Why are you doing church discipline? This is just for all Christians on campus to get together. So he got hold of every anti-Mormon book he could, a box full. His parents ran a house church. And we spent 2 years just wading through that box. And at the end of it, I came home from one weekend and found him, that's the literal photo, asleep on his sofa. He'd finally started reading the Book of Mormon after mostly getting a testimony based on me rebutting anti-Mormon literature, during which we worked out the church's weird stuff is actually quite cool. We actually have answers about priesthood authority and should you be baptized or not, and other things that his Christianity did not have a clue about, really, or not much meaty to say. He got baptized. His parents immediately threw him out. He lived with the bishop for a bit, went on a mission to Ireland, later reconciled with his parents, is now married happily and living in Namibia.
Oh, nice.
Namibia. Amazing, wonderful guy, still very faithful. And all the time I'm being a dissident, I worry about Steve. I'm going to break his testimony, but he's a big fan of the podcast and occasionally sends me naughty memes about Dallin Oaks. There's one of his recent artworks. He's really got into digital art. Good artist. So all of that, it's all going well. So why rebel? For goodness sake, intellectually, socially, personally, this church is proving to be absolutely brilliant, and I'm so glad I'm in it. It's kind of Sunstone's fault. I discovered Sunstone on my mission. My mum and I started subscribing to it, and it was amazing. This conduit, pre-internet, this conduit to people actually discussing the church from an intellectual perspective, and its arts and its news. And then, now it's so small. It's like 5% of what you'd find on a daily podcast about the church, but it's all we had. And we learnt through that about the September 6th thing that was happening, that the church was starting to excommunicate intellectuals. And my mum had always been a secret feminist. She was also subscribing to Exponent too, which is a kind of feminist Mormon newspaper, while serving in senior leadership in the women's organisations. And she often talks with me about her struggles with the patriarchy, we'd call it now, and difficulties with the men thinking they're God and telling the women what to do and the women believing them, which drove her nuts because often it was really bad advice. They're doing better these days, but it was pretty terrible. And later you could talk about the usual peaks, the policy of exclusion, the thing I think Naomi mentioned, where we were asked to write the letter to the MPs about opposing gay marriage. And of course, being Mormons in Britain, they told us that literally the week before the vote was going to happen. There was no time to think about it or discuss it. It was all way too late. So the incompetence of Mormon organisational skills played a blinder there. That was brilliant. But also, I just thought the homophobia I'm hearing from everyone chatting here in Elders Quorum and priesthood opening exercises when they were talking about it. Like, if I was a gay young adult or youth, I would be horrified right now about what I'm hearing. The Gospel Topics essays, for me, one of the peak final straws was Dallin Oates and Ballard saying we never hid anything from anybody. A year after, Ballard gave me hope by addressing the CES, this around 2015 or something, and saying you've got to start telling the truth. Stop telling the faith-promoting stories. Tell the difficult truth. Let them hear it at church, not from the internet. But then he did the opposite himself when it was his turn to speak face-to-face with all the youth in the church. He did all the opposite. He said, just trust us. That's all lies. It's all true.
But it's this idea that the church is hiding something, which we would have to say as two apostles who have covered the world and know the history of the church and know the integrity of the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 from the beginning of time. There has been no attempt on the part in any way of the church leaders trying to hide anything from anybody. So just trust us wherever you are in the world, and you share this message with anyone else who raises the question about the church not being transparent. We're as transparent as we know how to be in telling the truth. We have to do that. That's the Lord's way.
And then Nelson throwing Hinckley and Monson's I'm a Mormon under the bus kind of gave me the last hope died that they would adapt to the 21st century. They're already a bit late. But the idea of I'm a Mormon and I'm a mum and I'm a kickboxer in Guatemala or whatever, and I've got and I'm a skateboarder and we're diverse, we're interesting people, we're Mormons, yay!
You have to get the timing right, because otherwise it's just like bang. I guess it's like being a child on a swing. It was 40. It's not the record, but it's okay. You're trying to create a different world. The wall becomes the floor. The most simple things are so difficult there. Often people think it looks really easy, and they often say to me, I would like to have a go. But the truth is, it kills your body. Your core is just working really, really hard. I'm a dancer. I dance in the air, and I dance on the ground, and I teach dance. I get to dance in many different ways. I live in London. I never get bored of living in London. My name's Ness, and I'm a Mormon.
I believe in laughing through life. That's the way to get on.
I'm a legal representative. I'm an actress. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. My name is Jackie Notice, and I'm a Mormon.
People bug out when you're filming someone on a motorcycle.
My name is Jeremy Jones. I always told my mom and my dad I just won't wear a suit and a tie to work. And that was just the deal. Kind of the rack of the new boards. That's the one I've been working on this year, and it's scratch and sniff. Smells like pizza.
Skateboarding is what got me into snowboarding.
Just needed something to do in the winter, you know. I'm a husband. I'm a father, family man. I'm a snowboarder, I'm a skateboarder, my name's Jeremy Jones, and I'm a Mormon.
So, what are Mormons really like? You decide. Costa Rica means rich coast, and it's right here where Milton and Carolina Maren call home. Watch closely, because this story may challenge what you think you know about the roles men and women play in Mormon homes.
People react to that. When they see Carolina so pretty, and then they see her getting into the ring to compete with someone, people react and don't think that it's her.
When the bell rings, you need to fight. But that doesn't mean you're going to be disrespectful or that you hate that person.
And in my heart, I'm like, yes, that is actually who we are. We're a really interesting, fun, diverse bunch of people. We have all kinds of walks in life, but we're also Mormon and we're quite cool. Awesome. And then, like, the Grim Reaper stands there at the pulpit after basically breaking my sister's testimony with his press conference and his terrible answers about women. And it's like, no, that was a victory for Satan. One size fits all, the covenant path. We're going to ordain everyone in batches on the same day. You are no longer individuals. You are a Lord's battalion marching in step.
When the Savior clearly states what the name of his church should be, and even precedes his declaration with, "Thus shall my church be called," he's serious. And if we allowed nicknames to be used or adopt or even sponsor those nicknames ourselves, he is offended. What's in a name? Or in this case, a nickname? When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, or the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the most glaring omission is the absence of the Savior's name. To remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan. When we discard the Savior's name, we are subtly disregarding all that Jesus Christ did for us, even his atonement. After all he had endured, and after all he had done for humankind, I realized with profound regret that we have unwittingly acquiesced in the Lord's restored church being called by other names, each of which expunges the sacred name of Jesus Christ. For much of the world, the Lord's church is presently disguised as the Mormon church. My dear brothers and sisters, I promise that if we will do our best to restore the correct name of the Lord's church, he whose church this is will pour down his power and blessings upon the heads of the Latter-day Saints, the likes of which we have never seen. We will have the knowledge and power of God to help us take the blessings of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, and to prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord.
So in simple terms, and it's so easy to get lost in the weeds, I can list 100 things, but I've come to the simplicity after the complexity that Bruce Hafen talks about. It's not quite the one he was hoping for. It's a matter of integrity. If you're not practicing what you taught me to believe and what you preach and expect of the people you lead, you're not good leaders. Data, it isn't working. We can see the promised blessings and miracles are not happening any more frequently than common or garden coincidence, chance, or wishful thinking. The promised growth is not happening. The promised loyalty of your children and grandchildren to the religion, if you did all the things, is not happening. So integrity, data, reality check, and empathy. Empathy for the people harmed by a dysfunctional system. I have a list called Gays of Our Lives. It's a spin on this mad daytime soap opera in America, Days of Our Lives. So the gays of my life include 3 friends I grew up with in the church, at least 1 youth that I led as a young men's president, 2 missionaries I served with, 2 missionaries that I was ward mission leader of, at least one bishopric member friend of mine, 4 family friends, 3 members of my extended family, and the list goes on. I'm up to about 20. Not a single one of them has been able to stay in the church. It was just too dangerous for them to do that for various reasons. So that was, that's a heavy thing to consider. I had another epiphany when my first wife asked for a divorce, left the church, but said no to me cancelling our sealing, which was a bit weird and frustrating. So when my second wife and I wanted to be sealed in the temple and have her dream come true for that as well, we couldn't, because the best they would offer was you need to get married first, and then after a year you can apply for clearance to be married polygamously, because your previous wife said no to the sealing cancellation. It's a long story there, but it is ultimately based on some of the polygamy doctrine, that they genuinely believed that even though she had nothing to do with the church, she still had an entitlement to the first resurrection if she was still sealed to me. And we learnt then that the temple sealing is not a highly conditional covenant that you enter with a promise from God that if you're faithful to each other and God, you get this reward. It was a spell that was cast on us by temple priesthood, like in the fairy tales where the evil witches turn up and curse the baby. We could not lift this spell. They had to lift it. They had to choose to lift the curse on us. And when we pushed for the doctrinal background, it went straight to polygamy. Amazing. What an interesting moment of epiphany. And so on. And the gaslighting. Leaders who don't even understand Jesus' parable of the talents. When everything went public about Ensign Peak, the presiding bishopric and then the first presidency, in their official statement about it, both reference the parable of the talents as the reason they're investing the tithing of the poor in the stock market, because that's what Jesus would want them to do. I mean, when you've reached that point where they're dumber than a 5-year-old in primary, there's no hope for these people. It's game over.
After Ensign Peak manager David Nielsen went public about the true scale of the hundreds of billions being hoarded by the church in Ensign Peak's stocks and shares portfolios, as well as other investments, and alleged that tax-exempt funds had been illegally transferred to temporarily shore up the funding of the taxable for-profit operations of Beneficial Life Insurance and the City Creek Mall in Salt Lake City, the First Presidency issued an official statement on the 17th of December 2019 that read as follows. First Presidency Statement on Church Finances. Statement provided in response to media stories. Quote, "We take seriously the responsibility to care for the tithes and donations received from members. The vast majority of these funds are used immediately to meet the needs of the growing church, including more meeting houses, temples, education, humanitarian work and missionary efforts throughout the world. Over many years, a portion is methodically safeguarded through wise financial management and the building of a prudent reserve for the future. This is a sound doctrinal and financial principle taught by the Saviour in the parable of the talents, and lived by the church and its members. All church funds exist for no other reason than to support the church's divinely appointed mission. Claims being currently circulated are based on a narrow perspective and limited information. The church complies with all applicable law governing our donations, investments, taxes, and reserves. We continue to welcome the opportunity to work with officials to address questions they may have." Close quote. This, of course, was before the Securities and Exchange Commission fined the First Presidency releasing this statement for absolutely not complying with all applicable laws governing their reserves, many of which they were already shuffling away into illegal shell companies. In one of my earlier podcast episodes, I had a lot of fun with the quote,
Claims being currently circulated are based on a narrow perspective and limited information, because it perfectly describes how the general authorities share information with the members. A couple of months later, on the 14th of February 2020, the presiding bishopric, who at the time included Gerald Colsey as the presiding bishop, he has recently been promoted to apostle, and his first councillor, W. Christopher Waddell, who has just been called as the presiding bishop to replace Colsey, were interviewed by the Church News about how they organised the church's finances. Bishop Waddell was almost as ditzy as he was later in his May 1923 60 Minutes interview, when he tried and failed to pass the difference between secret, sacred, and confidential, 3 months after he and his fellow presiding bishopric members and the First Presidency were fined by the Securities and Exchange Commission. In the Church News interview, he said, quote, "There will come a time when all of these reserves will be necessary," he said. "We don't know when, we don't know exactly in what form. But you think of the Bible story of the 7 fat years and the 7 lean years. There's so many examples in the scriptures that we strive to follow, whether it's the parable of the talents and not to bury the talents. We saw what the Lord did to that individual. We want to be ready for any contingency." Close quote. You couldn't make it up. And it's like, that's not what the parable of the talents is about, you complete twats. It's about give the money to the people and then they will pass it forward. That's the metaphor here. But they can't even understand that. They both referenced the parable of the talents as the reason to hoard money in the stock market. You can't even after that. So a friend of mine shared recently, last week actually, that he couldn't tell the parable of the Good Samaritan in a talk that he wanted to give and apply it to compassion and healthcare in the American political context at church now. And my reply was, it is tragically indicative of how fundamentally broken the church is, particularly in the USA, that giving a talk which gets to the absolute heart of the difference between Jesus' religion and that of his Pharisee overlords in an LDS sacrament meeting in 2025 would be a, quote, bad idea. Most people in my country and continent have no problem with everyone being entitled to basic or emergency healthcare as a core principle of civilization, for example, a core value that seems to be a uniquely American blind spot. But all the TBMs of the world are trapped, having to make excuses for the teaching of the same general authorities. To run with Bruce Hafan's naive faith is not blind slogan, that was the name of his thing, the simplicity after complexity I have arrived at, having chosen the path of anti-Pharisee rebel and trying to find wholly realistic solutions to save the church from its doom spiral, has also taken me back to core principles. However much you try to get people lost and vulnerable in the weeds of elaborate apologetic mental gymnastics, gaslighting, distractions, doublethink about everything from LDS history and how to interpret feelings as evidence of truth, it all boils down to the same failures to get the simple things right. Lying is wrong. Stealing from the poor and hoarding that wealth is wrong. Facilitating and covering up a global machine of child abuse is wrong. These are the immovable rocks and realities that the church, its members, and its potential converts have to crawl over or around for it to be credible, not Jeffrey Holland's overclaiming certainty about the Book of Mormon. When teaching a parable of Jesus and applying it to your own lives and society, the principled Mormonism I grew up with and in is no longer possible, or leads in a straight line to an indictment of the First Presidency and the culture and belief system they now drill into Latter-day Saints' heads. It's game over. Close quote from myself. And later in the panel, we'll be discussing how Hugh Nibley and various political commentators today have identified a leadership taken over by businessmen and lawyers as one of the fundamental root causes of this inability to understand religion, even if you're running one, or to be good leaders in politics. We'll be discussing that later. So who are my role models for resistance, for actually trying to do something about this? You've got the traditional ones I learned about in history. Martin Luther, standing up to the might of the Catholic Church with his critique of what they were getting wrong. World War I and World War II, my ancestors who went and fought and got maimed and some died for the freedom that I have. That is a sobering thought. Would I have that courage? Would I do that? They did, and a lot of them did. And every minute we're alive in a free society and democracy, that has been paid for not just by the blood of Jesus, by a lot of other very Christ-like people. The Peasants' Revolt. We nearly had redistributive socialism in the Middle Ages. I mean, it's unbelievable. Britain actually managed some quite radical things along the way, and some of them are thought to have come from my stake in Maidstone. Thomas Becket is an earlier example as well of resisting abuses of power, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he shows us that martyrs can become more powerful. Canterbury became a pilgrimage centre. Henry II, who shouted, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" ended up having to really prostrate himself literally on the ground and crawl around and get whipped a few times to atone for killing the Archbishop of Canterbury. And there are interesting ironies. We have this Strengthening Church Members Committee, the SCMC, which says who will rid us of these turbulent priests and sends out the knights to go and do the chopping. I was exed in Canterbury stake. Yay! So I'm obviously really important because, you know, these things happen. We now live in the people's century where history is not just decided by a powerful monarch or priests, where we have power, the people have power, and we still have to struggle to hold on to it. The free press, the internet have massively empowered each individual to reach a larger audience. Chartism, as we've heard, was a democratic and constitutional reform movement of the poor to give them a bigger say in Parliament. It was a campaign for more loyal opposition and common consent. Oh, I should get my t-shirt out. Here we go. So, the loyal opposition. So this was a brief moment in Nemo and I's early relationship, trying to fix everything. We have a Chartist constitution in the church. The Doctrine and Covenants says that nothing should be done without the common consent of the people. D&C 2065 says that no one should be serving in any calling without being voted for, which they haven't done again for the first presidency. Other parts of the Doctrine and Covenants 107 say that intentionally, to get the message across that the president of the church is not above anyone else, any bishop can convene a council of 12 high priests and put the president of the church on trial. I mean, that's extraordinary. It's all there. Why did we not notice it? Somehow it wasn't a seminary scripture. I wonder why. But we have it there. And that's part of my excitement about this movement and campaign, is we don't have to step outside of Mormonism and Mormon culture and Mormon scriptures to fix the mess. We already have the solutions. Personal role models. My mother, she introduced feminism as an insider. She became a counsellor. She trained bishoprics and stake presidencies on how to talk to women, on how to refer them to professionals rather than thinking they can fix their lives. When she passed away a couple of years ago, I was wading through folders and folders of immaculately archived presentations. Women have value, women have worth, listen to their voice, involve them in the councils, and this is how to not mess up their lives. She became political. She loved the Thatcher Revolution. She joined the Women's Institute. She joined the Freedom Association, which was a kind of conservative campaigning group. She loved any kind of resistance against tyranny, and we should remember they don't all come from the left in politics. People who step up to lead, this will be controversial. Nigel Farage is one of my great heroes.
One of my first votes after my mission was for UKIP, the UK Independence Party. Nigel Farage and the millions of people who have supported his movements have been a major force in British politics since my early 20s, and at the moment he's highly likely to be the next Prime Minister.
If you speak truth, it will resonate with ordinary people far and wide, and they'll rally for change. And it's important, I think, to challenge the idea of master manipulators brainwashing the sheep. If you want to explain political leaders who get voted in and you're like, why did people vote for that crazy person? And personally, I'm not a fan of Trump, I would make clear. It's insulting to the sheep to say you're just swayed by easy rhetoric. You know, there are fundamental reasons people make those decisions, and I have faith in democracy. And if they manifest in something that you feel is really wrong, well, what's gone wrong? What is the cause of that? What's the root? And that applies in the church as well. Why are fundamental things going askew if they are? People did not vote for Brexit because of a dodgy statistic on a bus. People who've been faithful members for decades as adults or throughout their childhood don't leave because they're offended or lazy or wanted an excuse to sin. It took strength, not weakness, to step away from a lifetime of conditioning and sunk costs. So join in, participate, whatever your politics is, whatever your cause is. The individual can make a difference, even if there's only a few of us. And that, again, is what we're going to discuss in the panel later. Hugh B. Brown is one of my great heroes. He was trying to stop the church's racism. He was trying to protect the intellectuals. He gave some extraordinary keynote addresses at Brigham Young University, which you can find on the BYU Speeches website. They're amazing. I don't have time to kind of read the whole thing to you, but one great moment was where there was a real sort of conservative clampdown on teaching evolution at Brigham Young University. And he came and gave a speech there and kind of subtly said that the truth of God is written on two scriptures. There's the ones in the Bible and also on the stony tablets of the earth, i.e. the fossil record. And we should read them both like scripture. And if you want an evolution you can be comfortable with, surely that's Mormon doctrine, that we can evolve to become like God, that we can progress through steps.
We're very grateful in the church and in this great university that the freedom, dignity, and integrity of man is basic in church doctrine as well as in democracy. Here we are free to think and express our opinions. Fear will not stifle thought, as is the case in some areas which have not yet emerged from the Dark Ages. But God himself refused to trammel man's free agency, even though its exercise sometimes teaches painful lessons. Both creative science and revealed religion find their fullest and truest expression in an atmosphere of freedom. I would urge you to resist the downdrag of mental laziness. Someone has said that leads to the premature hardening of the intellectual arteries. I hope you will develop the questing spirit. Be unafraid of new ideas, for they're the stepping stones to progress. But you will respect, of course, the opinions of others, even of some of us who are older. Well, now I mention the freedom to express your thoughts, but I caution you that your thoughts and expressions must meet competition in the marketplace of thought. And in that competition, truth must emerge triumphant. Only error needs to fear freedom of expression. Seek truth in all fields. Science and religion must both avoid dogmatism. Religious people know only what God has been pleased to reveal about himself, and scientists frankly admit that today's truth may be modified and amplified by tomorrow's discovery. Now, when we mention man's potential, we think of the Latter-day Saint view of man. Before the gospel was restored, no one was heard to say, as God is, man may become. And yet Jesus said, be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, does not that injunction imply limitless possibilities? And the Apostle John said, now are we the sons of God? And it does not yet appear what we shall be, but this we know, and when he appears we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Now, if any of you have been bothered about the subject of evolution, I submit here an inspired concept of evolution which exalts man rather than debasing him, and relates both his origin and his destiny to the creator of all that is. There is evolution, if you wish to have it, to which you can subscribe with absolute safety. But when we speak of man's potential godlike status, let us not forget that the difference between us and our Heavenly Father now is incomprehensibly great. And that concept can only be made tenable in the light of the eternities that lie ahead and in the understanding and application of eternal progress. Remember, though, what Wyman said in this search for truth. The greatest enemy of truth is man's tenacity in clinging to unjustified beliefs. You must always be ready to reinterpret your concepts when they fail to pass the test of newfound facts. You must dethrone your prejudices. Someone has said that prejudice is a vagrant opinion without visible means of support. We need freedom. Freedom to think, to act, to take part in activities of all nature, kinds. But we need the steadying hand of intelligence, which is God-given. For instance, there are various opinions as to the time involved and the method employed in the great and continuing act of creation. The biblical account of that creation is compressed into a few lines. It's obvious that the Bible was never intended as a textbook on biology, anthropology, geology, or the other sciences. Does it not seem then that we should keep open-minded and be teachable on all these matters and not give too much time in a discussion of things that have not yet been revealed? The age of the earth, or the time that it took the Lord to create the body of man, doesn't make any difference so far as your salvation is concerned. Now, while I've said there's very little said in the Scripture about the creation, I call your attention to this fact, that God is the author of two accounts of the creation. One is in the Bible, supplemented by modern revelation, and the other is in the strata of the earth. Now, if you think of it in those terms, you will realize that there cannot be any conflict between those two accounts, because they both had the same divine author. Our scriptures, some of them in which we believe, were written by the finger of God on tablets of stone and delivered to Moses. And other scriptures were dictated by him to his prophet scribes, ancient and modern. And here we have the world's finest literature. But there's no more fascinating story and none more accurate when properly interpreted and understood than the story that is written, also figuratively by the finger of God, on the stony pages of the earth's crust.
So he spoke their own language back to them. He showed them the way to not be ignorant fools from their own scriptures and concepts. And he was very much about how essential it is to have freedom of thought. We are not so much concerned with whether your thoughts are orthodox or heterodox, as we are that you shall have thoughts. One may memorize much without learning anything. In this age of speed, there seems to be little time for meditation. And his ultimate quote that I found really useful was that the church, if it's going to survive, has to compete in the marketplace of ideas. And he taught that repeatedly. So what that means is you can't just brainwash everyone in your own bubble and tell them not to talk to anyone else. You have to be robust enough in your understanding of what truth is, what needs to happen in the world, and you have to get out there and cope with any kind of counter-argument. And you need to train yourself to do that effectively. And if it's not good enough, get rid of that idea. It's not good enough. You are wrong. You need to learn from that tension. And he understood that this is the heart of the best version of Mormonism, that our purpose here is to learn from everything, learn from mistakes, learn from challenges, to engage in the world, not shy away from it, that everything is there to learn from. And another hero of mine is Dieter Uchtdorf, who more gently, but throughout his time in the First Presidency, dropped what I call the Dieter bombs of truth. He admitted, from his airplane, of course, he admitted that the church leaders haven't always been very exemplary of our own values. He's admitted people have good reasons for leaving the church. And my favourite quote of his was from a talk in October 2015 called "It Works Wonderfully." I was so excited I made my first meme. I'm very proud of it. Sometimes we take the beautiful lily of God's truth and gild it with layer upon layer of man-made good ideas, programs, and expectations. Each one by itself might be helpful and appropriate for a certain time and circumstance, but when they are laid on top of each other, they can create a mountain of sediment that becomes so thick and heavy that we risk losing sight of that precious flower we once loved so dearly. Therefore, as leaders, we must strictly protect the church and the gospel in its purity and plainness, and avoid putting unnecessary burdens on our members. I was like, he gets it. He knows exactly what's gone wrong. We've piled everyone with all these great sounding ideas. Go the extra mile, do these 20,000 things and your life will work better. But it becomes a mountain that crushes us rather than a soil that we can grow in. I thought that was one of the most profound things I've ever heard. Other heroes, of course, Nemo, RFM, John DeLynn, Bill Reel, Gina Colvin, people taking to the internet airways to speak up, to make profound personal sacrifices to do so often. So find your personal issue and needs and then politicize it, weaponize it, but in a good way. What are you an expert in? And I think this is the key for people who make a difference in the world. What do you know? I know Mormonism. These are my people. This is my tribe. And I love how post-Mormons and nuanced Mormons have taken the conversation into, we're still here. We're still part of this community. It's part of us. It always will be. These are our people. So if I'm going to fight a social campaign, I'm going to do it with the people, my huge, enormous Mormon family, for my community. I'm good at this. I know it. I understand it. I may not be good at it, but I'm trying. So I think that's a real key, rather than just adopting someone else's cause in a sense, which is good as well if that works for you. But why not work where you have your connections, your strength? One of the most important things I've discovered and been taught is by people sharing knowledge through the internet. For example, how power was consolidated by Brigham Young at Winter Quarters. In one of Radio Free Mormon's first and most popular episodes, he talked about the apostolic coup, when Brigham Young engineered a takeover of the church basically by the Quorum of 12 Apostles in the First Presidency, whereas it had co-equal 70 and high priests and stake leaders that were kind of before then regarded as equal in authority and are described as such in the Doctrine and Covenants. And just to understand, why are we here? Why did we get from there in the scriptures to this? Finding out why, following the journey, tracing the ideas. I will rather rudely in my, but accurately, podcast talk about it like the Sith Masters with their apprentices, and you can track through the quorums of 12, the ones who are like the most controlling and evil, and then their little acolytes. I could name names. One of them is now the president of our church, unsustained. While I was researching President Kimball talk's audio, it was given in October 1960. It was when he talked about Native Americans turning white. And that has, of course, now been scrubbed from the audio in the archives of the church. But they didn't just scrub it, they replaced it with a mad talk from a previous conference from April 1960, when Ezra Taft Benson was ranting about the threat of communism. And I'm like, you tried to scrub the embarrassing one and had some audio to fill it, and you chose that one? Are you mad? I have lots of delicious Ezra Taft Benson ironies. He was obsessed with civil rights being the way that the Marxists were going to take over America. There were 2 serious attempts for him to literally run for president with the 2 major racist segregationists of the time, another amazing juicy morsel from history, including the extremely segregationist racist governor of Alabama. They eventually didn't come to anything, but they had the badges made and everything. So while President Benson was in a coma and President Monson and Hinckley, his councillors, were pretending he was still running the church by using a signature machine to write Ezra's signature on all kinds of documents, mission calls, including my one, and even letters to his own family. Caveat, they were probably doing that to stop the next Sith Lord, Boyd K. Packer, actually becoming president, because if they'd released Benson, that would have been him. So I'm now actually very grateful to them for their naughty political shenanigans after being quite angry about it. So keep learning. You often find more layers to these stories. The machine, pretending to be President Benson, called me to Alabama, the stomping ground of his old running mate for president, who stood in front of the National Guard trying to stop the schools being integrated. And again, an irony. The only churches in Alabama that weren't racially segregated was the tiny little congregations of the Catholics, the Seventh-day Adventists, and the Mormons, and a couple of very, very poor Pentecostal churches meeting in shacks. Layers of, are we the goodies? Are we the baddies? It's messy, isn't it? It's fascinating. Lived history is quite wild. While serving there with my very, very, very gay but not yet out companion. He's out now. So random coincidences happen in life. You can hit a lot of demoralizing brick walls. Why save people who don't want to be saved? It's a big one. Because often, you know, us dissidents trying to fix the church, it's like, no one's interested. They think we're terrible, even though their own children are leaving for the reasons we're talking about. So it can be hard, but people are still being broken by these systems. All institutions survive only if the people who believe in them take responsibility and become their guardians. The young are amazing. They deserve the best. People can be changed by education. I'm a teacher. I've seen in every aspect of my life, and hundreds of thousands of us have been getting at the full truth about our church and history. This is me with two other brave souls. I wasn't being very brave. We heard about Sam Young's campaign for child safeguarding. The BBC journalists sort of put the word out to Sam, is there anyone in Britain willing to come and talk on telly about it? We all volunteered in some mad ex-Mormon group. And there we were outside the BBC, about to appear on Victoria Derbyshire, the flagship morning news programme of the BBC, and we got 15 minutes to talk about the petition and campaign to improve safeguarding. And that was my first time really putting my head above the parapet and being that public, you know. Yeah, lots of stories there. I love this one. For the baby Exmos, is it going to be okay? It's going to be effing incredible. And I think that's a powerful thing, to not have this narrative that leaving the church, you end up devastated, drug addict somewhere, and it's all terrible. A few people do, because they go a bit reckless in their deconstruction phase. They want to relive the teenagehood they never had, but they're too old for that now, and it's really dangerous. You know, tattoos maybe, okay, porn shoulders fine, watch some R-rated movies. Drugs and booze and sexual liberation, not so much, not a good idea. So I've held on to the word of wisdom. Definitely don't have the energy for an orgy. But I absolutely love my one positive gift from Mormonism, which is go with the lower risk options for entertainment. Things tend to be a bit calmer. There are lots, so that is a form of resistance. How can we resist? There's Fowler's stages of faith development. What a wonderful discovery. That you questioning everything, taking back your autonomy, renegotiating your relationship with your church community is actually a progression spiritually, not a backward slide. Just that idea has changed my life and a lot of people's. Isn't that brilliant? It kind of makes you invincible. You can choose the gentle insider change pathway that my mum took. You can be the voice at the pulpit, telling the truth and challenging power and culture in the way that Hugh B. Brown did. And Hugh Nibley in his valedictorian address to BYU, which we'll hear a bit about later again, where he eviscerated the church for letting lawyers and businessmen take over. He said, this is what killed the Roman Empire and it's happening to us. And he did. And the truth bombs. So be the voice at the pulpit. If you get a voice, say something powerful, impactful, even if it's risky. You can do public opposition and loyal opposition. You can do a cost-benefit analysis. What is worth me putting my neck out for? Can I do this? Will it make a difference? We have nothing to lose but our chains in some situations. The same rational approach that got me on a mission, despite being very shy and cynical about missions, also got me excommunicated and very joyfully choosing the side of being a dissident. I did a rational calculation. This church is going to be dead before I am, effectively. There'll be a few people left, but it will no longer have the growth mechanisms occurring. It will be just decline and attrition. So am I going to just watch that happen, or can I have some fun for a few years and really try fight it? Because sometimes communities and religions reform themselves and fix it. Is it worth it? It's so hard to keep a convert. So hard, so much effort, so many man hours, so much difficulty for us in our various branches of Mormonism to make a convert and keep them and have the kids stay. Does it have to be that hard? Is it a generic Christian problem, or is it a me problem? And I think about how much we've normalized ideological repetition, family and role model pressure, guilt trips, loyalty tests, regular interrogations in some of our branches to check our worthiness and our thought crimes. That's not normal. That's not how Christian churches should run. It's an indescribable release from constant anxious perfectionism and stress and guilt. Uchtdorf's mountain flies away. Church is now 2 hours on a Sunday for me, not 6. When I was being ward mission leader and a ward clerk or something, I actually get a Sunday, even while attending. That's the way to go. Apostate, still go to church. You don't have to do the callings. It's definitely the way to go. Doing good is wonderful, and you can. The victories on safeguarding that the dissidents have had been so worth it. Just all of it has just been worth it for that. Having purpose in older age and life experience, becoming more relevant as you get older rather than less, is quite a challenge. Usually we have a cult of youth, don't we, in society? But we have so much that we can be a guardian of and pass on. Of course, this is what the general authorities think they're doing. They have a version of 1950s Mormonism that they feel terrified is under threat. But we've got a version of Mormonism too that used to be there or was stronger. And I'm just as militant about that as they are about theirs. The apologists are starting to agree with us. This is going to be one of my next episodes. They've agreed. The more you talk about Mormonism, even if you're defending the church like fanatically, you start to realise the leaders are old and out of touch. Our youth are going. We're not meeting their needs. They're saying it too. Truth is prevailing. There is an LDS Church in Exile to minister to. And it's much bigger than the ones at church on a Sunday. They're not all interested. A lot of them have just walked away, but there's a lot of us. So what next? The community of Christ very kindly and slightly patronizingly chuckle at us as they did all these, as they sorted all this mess out long ago, although they've been very kind and open about the struggle it's been in many ways to make decisions, to actually practice common consent in decision making. And we've had some wonderful presentations at Sunstone UK about that, and really useful lessons they're able to teach us if we want to take that path. But they're also shrinking. Both churches are looking at the developing world, the global south as the future. But my view is if the church can't be relevant, interesting, exciting to me as a British young person or old person with a university education, that's a fail. You shouldn't have to be dependent on endemic poverty and desperation in order to get converts, bluntly. This is a message that should work for everyone at any level of society. And if it's not, that's on us. Mormonism makes liars of us all is an RFM phrase. And it's an uncomfortable one to think of. But I'm starting to realise how much we normalise lying to each other, how much we would hide from converts, how much we'd pretend to do a survey as a missionary activity. Of course, no one cared about the survey. It was a con. And we just did that, without even thinking for a moment there was anything unethical about that. The ends always justified the means, censoring ourselves, silencing ourselves. There's a generational inherited trauma in the psyche of the church from past persecution and a desperate need for survival that analysts often speak about. And we start in primary teaching stories of persecution and martyrdom and paranoia. I was talking to a very feisty, extremely elderly member of my ward who often harks back to getting her testimony as a young person. She said the missionaries back then in the 60s first gave you the pamphlet of Joseph Smith's testimony and history before the Book of Mormon because they were quite expensive. And she felt this empathy with this poor boy, this poor innocent boy. No one believed him. No one was kind to him when they should have been with his questions. And it reminded me what a powerful story that is, that narrative of the everyman that we can all relate to. Just an innocent person trying to find out what's true, being bombarded with different messages from different churches. We now know that Joseph Smith was also an absolute rogue who was an amazing con man and had all these other nefarious skills, while also perhaps also being a prophet, which is fun to play with. But how powerful the stories are. And I think starting to understand how we have got ourselves into these mindsets in these situations is really important and empowering. My current working theory is we've achieved such a cover-up, so much self-censorship, so we were so controlled by information, which the internet has, of course, blown up. But how did that happen? And is there a hope in that? Mass participation in ministry and teaching and leading. By having such mass participation where you give everyone a job and we're all doing it rather than one minister per congregation, which is a huge weakness of other churches, absolutely accelerates the evolution of what stories work, what works for people. We test it out live in real time with large samples. And that, in a sense, seems to me have been the way. We always stepped one step ahead of having a reality check all the stuff that was being hidden from us. And we changed. The story that the missionaries teach now as the foundational story is very different to the one before. We're now learning that the first vision kind of popped out of nowhere much later on, the restoration of the priesthood, and starting with that narrative, as the LDS Mormons did, is a kind of 20th century invention, that those things didn't used to be a thing. And they even retrofitted the Doctrine and Covenants to write them in later. So can our mass participation in dialogue and the internet hive mind the solutions to all these problems? It's working. Truth is prevailing. If at the moment, this is bad news for the defensive institutional church, but it's liberating people and it is starting to spread. So I don't give up hope. There are these different tribes of Mormons. They each have their needs. The people who care about the truth, the people who care about integrity, the people who want community, the people for whom the church is a huge step up. If we can make a healthier way of doing church where all of them are welcomed and appreciated, as many speakers have been saying, rather than just the doctrinaire control freaks, that's how we can get better and healthier. And I love the big ideas of deification and eternal progression and becoming a God through learning and experience, not a magic spell being cast on us. The democracy of common consent. These are genius solutions for working with the 21st century state of mind, the democratic values of modern people. These core Mormon ideas are congruent with those rather than a threat to them. So now I'm in a weird twilight zone. I go to church, I get mad, occasionally I'll speak up, and poor Elder Scorn President quickly closes things down a bit early. I usually wait to the end so he doesn't lose his whole lesson. Mostly I'm trying to hold my tongue. I genuinely feel good for the people coming to the church because they seem to have found something that's helping them. But in 90% of the cases, they won't be there in 2 weeks' time, as has always been the case. I go with an open, honest heart. I want to hear wisdom. I have a book. Sometimes there's one line, sometimes it's a whole page, depends on how good the speaker is. I go for spiritual food. But I get far more spiritual food from 1 hour of typical ex-Mormon or nuanced Mormon podcasting than I do from a month of that. The church is not competing. The places where the real free, meaningful, meaty, educational, informative discussions are happening are with the church in exile. And it's wonderful and it's powerful. And at the moment, I think that's mostly where Jesus is at, because that's how he did it. So there's another perspective, that this church has continued, and it's doing it the right way, the Mormon way. You learn, you grow, you change, you progress, you get better and better at what you do. But it's the ex-Mormons, the nuanced Mormons, who are doing that, while the institutional church evaporates before our eyes. Maybe that was God's plan all along. Let's make Mormon fascinating and fun again, because they've made it unbelievably boring, which is unbelievable, because to make this religion boring, you have to have no imagination or skill set or creativity whatsoever. But it's wonderful, and people are loving it, and we're still chewing on the ideas. There is this version of Mormonism. It's just not institutionalized. It's living free. It's escaped into the wild. Who knows what's going to come of that in the long run? And I'm excited to be a part of that. Thank you. The end. I have no idea what's going on with time, so I don't know if I've overrun or what, but apologies if I have. Any questions or thoughts at all?
Yes.
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 Yes. That's what I've been thinking all day.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I brought up, born in the church, brought up in the church.
Yeah.
Eldest of 7 children.
Yeah.
To the same church in the 60s and 70s that no doubt you did.
Mm.
And here we are, you still hold a sense of Mormonism that I do not recognise.
Mm-hmm.
I never recognised it. And a proclamation of monopoly of things like the truth.
Yeah.
Apotheosis and
Yeah.
become gods. So how can Mormonism, I'll ask you, produce you at one end of the spectrum, me at the other, and is the structure of the church something that enabled you to sit there with the privilege of being
Well, I'm white and male,
and me to go, it wasn't not only not good for me, the credibility of it was never there. So how would you explain the spectrum between you and I?
I think in a sense that you find that in every religious movement or political movement. So that's one answer of several that I would give, and feel free to chip in, anyone else. I think, as I said, there are many ways to Mormon, that brilliant slogan from Sunstone and probably lots of other people, that I think the fact that we are empowered by so much teaching, like the thing I used to be really proud of is our church, particularly living in the Bible Belt where it's all worship and take the money and no education, that most of our experience on a Sunday was lessons, learning. It's a school. Learn, study, and we encourage that from a young age. Of course, they then don't want you to actually act on what you find out or carry on studying. They just want, they prefer an easy feedback loop.
Yeah, that's right.
But you get empowered.
Yes. You don't question it.
Yeah.
You were
But
given it.
I grew up in a Mormonism where my parents practiced questioning within the faithful paradigm. And the scriptures tell us to. This is why I'm finishing with that. I've often said, and I still stand by it, the last thing that will have to be torn from my cold, dead hands to entirely give up on Mormonism is that Joseph Smith, the charlatan, the adulterer, the criminal, the cad, also wrote that scripture. I'll take that, because it's saying you can't exercise power by reference to your own authority. You have to be persuasive. So it's about the ideas. It has to be rational, a rational faith. It has to make sense. And I think the way that some people arrive at that religion, while of course plenty are experiencing just thought control and oppression, particularly women, is they also gave us that.
Well, I don't see the rational.
Yeah. The rational there, I'd say, is it says leadership has to be by gentle persuasion, by real sincere love unfeigned. Sorry, it's tiny writing. But that for me is the key, that your only influence over other people, even as a leader, is what you offer them has to be self-evidently true, that it just makes sense. And it has to come from a place of sincere, genuine, charitable love and compassion and patience.
And so where did you think you found that?
There.
and just there.
Oh, well, and lots of others. There's a few others.
D&C 58 says,
be anxiously engaged in a good cause.
No.
Don't let the control freaks tell you what to do. That's a failure. You're damned if you're only living your religion because someone's controlling you. So there are scriptures of absolute democratic rebellion.
Yeah.
They're not the only ones, and I'm not pretending they are.
Yes, and of course they were there,
Yeah.
but actually in practice, it
Yeah.
you lived
Yeah.
your
Oh, I couldn't live it.
experience.
No, I got excommunicated for trying to live it. So I'm not saying it's there within the institutional church. It's not. But it used to be, to some extent at least, when there was less control. And that's the thread, you know, it's a percentage of this thing. And you could say, well, I can find those ideas in secular atheism and humanism, absolutely. Yeah. I can find these ideas in other religions. You know, it doesn't have to have a Mormon label on it. A lot of it's just basic common sense. But the fact that he's there within the scriptures is, for me, in a sense, I'm not asking you to have had the same experience as me, or I'm not shaming you for having a different experience. I'm just saying this is where I got it from. I'm a little nerd boy. I wasn't messing about in Sunday school. I was being incredibly righteous. I was paying strict attention and marking up my scriptures, and I believed this. And some of it I still believe. So the ideas are there. It's that seed of a great religion that even Joseph Smith had and even Brigham Young had at times.
So at which point was it great?
Yeah. I think it's still great in those ideas, those foundational truth ideas. Not that the churches, LDS Church, is living up to them. But if they did, they'd do better. I think as most of my generation feel that we were in some kind of Goldilocks zone. My parents came from BYU, walked into Tiny Twig in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and said, oh, hi, we just come from BYU. Someone said, oh, good, we need a new branch president. My dad was branch president within a week, and they went to work trying to transplant what they'd learnt from actual BYU in the early 1970s to a group of converts meeting in a very beer and cigarette butt-ridden community hall in the middle of a council estate. And over time, by the time I was a teenager, we had seminary, we had institute, we had state dances, we had a social life that was better than our peers. We were growing, people having children. It was a thriving community. We had culture, all these things that in most of our wards have gone now, either intentionally or through losing members. But it got us into our early 20s, it got us into our marriages, if it was working for us all the time. Of course, there were the LGBTQ people being lost by the wayside and lots of others. You know, I'm not ignoring the rates of attrition. But when I speak to my peers, it's usually a powerful sense of loss. John DeLynn talks about it, Bill Reel, RFM, you know, Gina and all the rest.
Yes.
Yeah. That it peaked, it seemed the church was growing before the internet. We had no reason to doubt we weren't being lied to. Great. Peace of mind. We're in the growing thing. We're doing better than the rest of society, frankly, in a lot of ways. We've got thriving communities. But then the internet came and blew it up because we found out how much they were lying to us all along. And that broke it for me and for a lot of people. Yeah.
So, yes, and I felt that I'd seen that live.
Well done. Because I wish I had.
I would just don't understand how it produces these two of us.
Yes. Yeah.
You're immersed in it.
Yeah.
And I have the experience
of.
I mean, that really is the same with anything.
Yeah.
It's not just Mormonism. It's politics. It's
but
any religion. It's any philosophy. You know, you show two people exactly the same thing.
It's fascinating.
They get a completely different experience. And, you know,
I think there's a resilience there where and it's down to personality types, absolutely. It's down to all kinds of things. I had the example from my parents of being able to exist in two worlds at once. So I think that's it. You have a resilience and a love for it. If you can find a way to navigate both, to know how much it's broken, but also see how good it could be and appreciate how it has helped. But again, there's so many caveats. If I had young children, I wouldn't be there every Sunday. No, because that's too dangerous for them. I don't trust it.
In what way?
Safeguarding apocalypse. That's all you need to know straight away. They're not good enough at the safeguarding. It's just dangerous. In a context of overly trusting people who are not trustworthy. Our previous bishop was arrested and imprisoned for child pornography offences while serving as bishop. So my congregation has experienced that. That's very real. No one mentions it now. They've tried to smooth it over, but yeah.
It's funny, Peter, because you mentioned the Hugh Bang quote about the marketplace of ideas, and just that whole concept to a fully fledged member of the church today is it's seen as a challenge. I think that kicked up against the kind of absolute truth rhetoric from the Kimball years. We have.
We'll tell you what the truth is, not we'll have a debate and learn together what the truth is.
We switched during that particular time, and I know Hughie Brown and Ezra Taft Benson were basically sworn enemies. But I think during that time we shifted. There was a slow transition from a humility about our faith to an aggressive certainty, which I think a lot of my generation were very used to hearing. Like, this is what it is. Whether you choose to follow it or you don't. This is absolute truth.
Yes.
And so I think where people have realised, that perhaps it isn't all what it promises to be, with that inevitability of it's either true or it isn't.
Yes.
Okay, well, it mustn't be then.
Yeah.
I'm off.
Yeah.
See ya.
And it's lost moral integrity.
And look at each other and say, oh, well, that's surprising, isn't it?
It's kind of ironic that the church had by far its best growth during that period of confidence and its absolutism.
Oh, that's true, actually, yeah.
And, that's the... You talk about, how could the church change? And they've got an impossible situation because I generally go to church. I participate in church. I'm there every week and I see it amongst my family. And if you remove that certainty, then it largely falls apart. And so they're there because it provides them with certainty. And as you were saying, I believe there are some people that just love that. Some people need that certainty, and it provides them with meaning and drive to go forward. Other people don't. And if the church loses that, and no disrespect to the community of Christ, but I think they provide a really good example of losing that confidence, that swagger, that certainty, then it changes it forever. And I think the church is working very hard to try and maintain some degree of certainty in a time when there's so much evidence that they don't have that certainty.
I think it's the certainty that's made it boring.
Well, I think
certainty is a wall.
Because it removes any discussion or nuance or diversity.
Can I offer a kind of a third way that is also, I hope, congruent with everything you said? I'm really glad you said that.
You don't have to.
No. I'm going to anyway. It is simply, the certainty is not that we have all the answers, but the certainty is the method. That the method is line upon line, precept upon precept, learning. But that means, and LDS Mormons are rubbish at it, you also have to leave behind the things you've unlearned. We have no mechanism for that, although they're starting to vaguely say, oh, they were speaking as men, or they were that was their time. They're using the words of abandoning, but nothing specific, and they won't ever admit they were actually lying about having a revelation or just mistaken. So what I'm trying to say here is the certainty is the idea, the philosophy of Mormonism, that in its best forms, that it's about an eternal progression, that if you're going to have a God who's parental, I can't believe in a parental God who doesn't want us all to have everything that he has. No parent would want less for their children than all they've got and then some. And any religion that tells me the best God is going to offer you is torturing half your grannies in hell in vats of lava, while you're meant to stand there in the fluffy clouds singing how great God is, and that's it, which I've asked a lot. That is all most of the Christians have to offer, frankly, as an endgame. That's ridiculous. But the genius of Joseph Smith, he saw that was ridiculous as well. He could see the flaws. He was a great analytical thinker. He saw the gaps. What about the people who die without baptism? We'll fix that. What about the people who, and this here I'm pushing back on the polygamy thing again. What about the people who remarry? If marriage is something that can carry on in eternity, you're going to have polygamy. But it needs to work both ways, to be fair. It would be the feminist argument potentially. But then you have to redefine what marriage means. It's not an exclusive thing. You're sharing lots of people in lots of ways, but what does that even look like in heaven? Who knows? Because they can't be bothered to ask, as we've established earlier. But he saw a problem and solved it. Also his libido, so I'm not excusing that. But he, you know, if marriage is eternal, you have to have polygamy. So all these people who talk about disavowing polygamy, or having to do something around that, I think it's a difficult one. You have to tread carefully. It has to, in a sense, more like equalise polygamy with ultimate free choice. And I think what David identified in his session was that intimidation that, particularly for women, well, if you get to the next life and you deserve the celestial kingdom but you're not married, you will be assigned to a polygamous marriage, probably.
It's okay.
So that's what I'm talking about, is that big idea. That's what excites me, and I think that's what still excites people to keep bothering, is because there is a golden thread there through it all, or a water of living something or other, whatever metaphor you want to use. How we actually practice it and teach it and integrate it and everything that we do is a huge challenge. I definitely think we've done better in the past and we could do better. But I totally agree that I'm not personally, love you all, seeing Community of Christ as entirely the way forward. We need them to teach us how to do common consent, but we need to have certainty. We need to have unique selling points. Or maybe we don't, we're just all Christians, which is fine, but you cease to exist as an entity. What are our unique selling points? And I love how Community of Christ does still, even while being a bit iffy on some of the scriptures, very much have this idea of building Zion community as a Mormon unique selling point, of the way it's been described to us at times by Brother Bolton, the idea of being a voice of rebellion, of change to society at large. The idea of personal revelation and ongoing revelation is something Community of Christ still embrace. And so I do, I think that, and where that is part of our most annoying Mormon friends' makeup, I think that's also what's carrying them on. They've got some really good stuff in there amongst the things that we find difficult, because I think those are true principles, or at least very inspiring ones. And I guess my final point is, the way society is going is to become gods if we don't blow ourselves up. Whether as AI entities or whatever, we are learning to create life. We've got the genetic engineering, we've got the computing power, we have the technology to, so this is the idea of, like cybernetic Mormonism or something. There's a phrase for this idea that humans will evolve through technology to become like God. Transhumanism, that's it.
Fun bunch of weirdos.
Yeah. So we have already the religion for the transhumanist AI era. We've already got it, because we talk about becoming gods through learning, through tech, in effect. The big excuse for the seer stones recently has been it's just like an iPhone, which is nonsense, of course, but actually there's an idea there. So that's why I'm still excited. I think Mormonism has all the answers to fix Christianity and make it credible in the 21st century, but we're absolutely crap at doing it ourselves, and it's this tragic irony. It's just maddening.
And can I ask where you place Christianity in the global?
I'm afraid that's too vague for me to. What do you mean specifically?
Is Christianity for you the only way?
No, it's certainly the most popular, and I think there are good reasons for that. I think the idea of, I don't like the Hindu gods because it's too impersonal in a sense, and I'm catastrophically insulting loads of people through my ignorance, but I'm generalising. I can't be doing with 1,000 reincarnations, that's just sadistic. And if the point of becoming like God is then that God just disintegrates and keeps repeating a cycle, which is the ultimate big picture in Hinduism and Buddhism, no thank you, that seems a bit pointless. The Islamic the Islamic critique of Christianity is, why would God need to torture his own child in order to forgive? God's just merciful, he'll forgive. But there's something so powerful about God becoming man, about that humility, about showing us, about being with us, rather than a distant superior entity all the time. I think that's some of the magic of Christianity. And all that comes with that, for me, is why I still bother with it. And I can't disagree with most of what Jesus said or is recorded as saying. And it's inspired a lot of bad, but a lot of good as well. But then also, what a horrible thing to say to everyone, you're sinners who need to repent and you need someone to come and save you. You're not good enough, you're dirty. That's just bad. So I'm starting to raise those questions with myself. But again, Mormonism has a doctrinal workaround in that, no, we don't do original sin. Another triumph of Joseph Smith. We don't do that. You're here to learn. Our church is not good at this. It just gives everyone guilt trips. As I think one of the things you were saying was in yours was talking about reframing repentance or sin as a learning experience rather than the death of you sort of thing.
Educational ascent.
Yes. Yes, educational ascent. And that's the idea of that progression through life experience. So again, it's there potentially. I'm a nerd. I'm an intellectual. I read these scriptures and think about the ideas as a little teenager and loved it and talked about it with my friends. That's my religion. Not guilt tripping over wanking in an interview. There's bigger things to consider. So that's why I'm still excited. Because I have started to learn about other religions and philosophies. I got to teach both for a bit at school, which was a brilliant learning experience. And you sort of find out they're not that much better. We shouldn't be intimidated. And as what, sorry?
And if you had none of them?
In what sense?
No religion.
Yeah. I think you still have to have a healthy secular humanism, which I also believe is lovely and good. I teach loads of amazing kids doing much better than the Mormons are, and in secular humanist environments. No going to church. They're just great kids. They go to scouts. They learn good values. They've got lovely parents who love them and care about them. But then that depends on a nice upbringing and a good home life. A lot of people don't have those. Religion gives that. For them, this is better. But why should they have to pay such a high price in their autonomy, in their money, in their mental health, in order to get that community? It's a bait and switch for too many.
On the tight link. So.
Yeah. I love your questions, but we need to stop or we're going to get next door. Thank you so much. Paul, thank you. Thanks a lot.